The rain hammered down outside the hospital entrance, each drop a silent cry for second chances. Inside, even as machines beeped and monitors glowed pale, her breath came in tiny, fragile gasps. But it was there. Lying on the gurney was Emily Caldwell, the billionaire's child, unconscious after a sudden collapse that no one had foreseen. Doctors hovered, hands shaking, afraid, and the only person with the power to bring her back was Lily, a young woman they had cast aside when she was just 16, accused of oddness, labeled a witch. Just 6 months earlier, the town had turned its back on Lily, whispering rumors about her quiet ways and herbal remedies. Now she stood in the hallway, rain-soaked coat clinging to her frame, her eyes fierce with determination. If she failed, Emily would die. Before we dive deeper, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and hit subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Inside the ER, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and hope. Lily closed her eyes, remembering the night she fled into the woods after they broke her safe space. The crackle of leaves underfoot, the sting of cold air, the memory of her grandmother's gentle voice telling her the plants would help. She had lived among herbs and whispered remedies, bent toward life in a way no one had believed in. Finally, she whispered in Emily's ear, "I remember what your mother always used to say. Hold on." Her hand hovered, trembling over the IV line, a mixture of ancient family concoction and modern science. Then, a flutter. A tiny movement. Emily's eyelids flickered. Lily exhaled, half skeptical, half relieved, her heart pounding, the world narrowing to that one moment. 6 months earlier, Lily had been begging for scraps, and they had chased her off, afraid. Now she found herself the only one they begged for a miracle. Why did they ever reject her? If it were you, watching this, what would you do when the same people who dismissed you beg you for help? Could you forgive them? Could you trust them? Or would you hold your own hope tight, fragile as a heartbeat? This is where our journey begins. Her name was Ruth Miller, 15 years old, a quiet girl from a town where silence wasn't always a choice. Sometimes it was survival. She'd lost both parents before she was even old enough to understand what grief meant. Her father, gone in an accident the townsfolk still whispered about when they thought no one was listening. Her mother, taken by illness just 2 winters later. That left Ruth in the care of her stepmother, a woman whose sharp tongue could wound deeper than any blade. It wasn't long before the accusations began. At first they were muttered under breath. Strange child. Bad luck follows her. Then came the stories, little lies stitched together until they felt like truth. One day when a neighbor's newborn fell ill, her stepmother pointed a finger. "She's cursed," she told them, "a witch." In a town where superstition still had teeth, that was enough. Ruth was different. She had something she never understood herself, a strange gift, if you could call it that. She could sense illness before anyone else noticed. She could look into someone's eyes and feel the sickness growing before the fevers, before the coughs, before the pain had even begun. But in the wrong place, at the wrong time. A gift like that could be dangerous. And here, in this town, it was. The town itself was a patchwork of 2 worlds sewn together by resentment. Down by the river stood the small wooden homes, paint peeling, roofs patched with whatever could be found. This was where families counted every coin and prayed each harvest would last the winter. High on the ridge stood the estates, white-pillared mansions behind wrought iron gates, where the wealthiest families looked down, both literally and otherwise, on those who served them. And no family's shadow stretched longer over this town than the Caldwells. Their fortune had built the mills, the school, even the church's new steeple. When they spoke, the mayor listened. When they wanted something, it happened. Ruth had nothing. No family to shield her, no home of her own, no safety. The Caldwells had everything, and their influence could ruin a life before the sun had set. And for reasons Ruth could not yet see, Her life was already crossing into theirs. Have you ever been in a place where one person's word could shape your fate? Where a lie, told by the wrong lips, could strip you of everything you have left? Imagine being 15, alone, and knowing the most powerful people in town could decide whether you lived in a home or in the cold. What would you do then? It happened on a Sunday, the kind of morning where the church bells rang so loud you could almost believe they could drown out all the small-town gossip. Ruth sat in the back pew, hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to disappear into the hymn book. She hated these gatherings, but her stepmother insisted, said it was important to be seen, though Ruth always suspected it was more about keeping an eye on her. The pastor had just begun his sermon when Ruth's gaze drifted across the aisle to Mr. Hargrove, an older man known for his booming laugh and his heavy hand on the offering plate. Something in his color wasn't right. His lips seemed duller, his posture just slightly off. Her stomach tightened. She knew the feeling, an invisible warning bell she had felt before. She whispered to her stepmother, "I think something's wrong with Mr. Hargrove. His heart." But before her stepmother could reply, the man's hand clutched his chest, and the pews erupted into chaos. They carried him out, still breathing but pale, and by the time the ambulance pulled away, every eye in that church was on her. Her stepmother's voice cut through the murmurs. She knew before it happened, she said loudly, almost proudly, except there was nothing proud in her eyes. "Tell me, is that natural? Is that holy?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but the seed was planted. By the end of the week, whispers had turned to stares. Stares became shoves. Her stepmother didn't try to protect her. She led the charge. "She's dangerous," she told the women at the market. "No one's safe around her." Soon, Ruth wasn't welcome at the church, or the store, or anywhere people gathered. She came home one night to find the locks changed and her few belongings in a box on the porch. With nowhere to go, she found shelter behind an abandoned diner on the edge of town. Its cracked windows were covered in dust, the old neon sign still faintly humming when the wind hit it right. She made a bed from cardboard and an old blanket someone had thrown away. Nights were long there. The cold crept in under her skin, and the sound of trucks on the highway was her only company. And then came the food. A sandwich one night, a small paper bag of apples the next, always left neatly where she slept. No note, no explanation. Only the faint trace of someone's footsteps disappearing into the dark. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her all along. She saw him only once, a tall figure in a black coat, standing half in shadow. He didn't speak, didn't step closer, just placed the food down and walked away. And yet something in Ruth's chest tightened. She couldn't explain it, but she sensed there was something wrong with him, not in the way of sickness she'd felt in others, but something deeper, heavier. She told herself it wasn't her concern. After all, she had enough to survive on, but deep down she knew. People didn't just watch out of kindness. People watched because they wanted something. Her name was Isabella Grant. 17 years old, the only child of Richard Grant, the man whose wealth was the backbone of the town, the man whose signature could build or break an entire street. Isabella had grown up in the glow of chandeliers and silk curtains, her world guarded by men in dark suits and cars with tinted glass. To most, she was untouchable, more rumor than reality. People saw her in photographs at charity events, heard her laugh in passing at the country club, but no one really knew her. That night, at the autumn gala, the air in the ballroom shimmered with the sound of crystal glasses and polished laughter. Isabella stood near the grand staircase, speaking with guests, her gown catching the light like water. Then, without warning, her voice faltered. She swayed once, twice, and collapsed before anyone could catch her. Gasps cut through the music, heels clattered on the marble floor. The doctors in attendance rushed to her side, but their expressions told the crowd more than their words. They didn't understand what was happening. By morning, the whispers had started. Some said it was a rare illness, something undetectable and fast-moving. Others, in hushed tones, called it a curse, something old and unspoken, rooted in the history of the Grant family itself. And in a town where superstition lived just under the surface, that explanation spread faster than any medical theory. 3 nights later, Ruth sat behind the diner, curled under her blanket, when she heard footsteps again. She looked up, expecting to see the silent figure leaving food. But this time, he didn't walk away. The man in the black coat stepped into the faint light of the flickering sign. His face was weathered, unreadable, and his voice, when it came, was steady but urgent. "If you can help her," he said, "I'll make sure you're never hungry again." Ruth didn't need to ask who he meant. The entire town had been buzzing with Isabella Grant's name, with talk of her condition, of how no one, no doctor, no specialist, could find the cause, and now here was a stranger telling her that she could. Her heart pounded. Helping meant going back into the same world that had spat her out without hesitation, back to the same people who had called her dangerous, cursed, unwanted. She thought of the cold nights she had spent here, the bruises from hands that had shoved her away, the eyes that had looked at her like she was less than human. What would they do if she returned? Would they use her, destroy her again, or worse, believe her only to take everything from her afterward? She stared at the man, her breath visible in the cold air, and for the first time in weeks she spoke. "Why me?" The man didn't answer. He only held her gaze for a long moment, then said softly, "Because no one else can." Ruth hesitated. Hunger gnawed at her, but fear gnawed deeper, and somewhere in the dark, the decision she made next would change everything. Let the stranger's words sit in her mind, like a thorn she couldn't pull out. But hunger has a way of making choices for you, and by the second day, her answer was clear. She would help, but on her terms. "No one can know I'm there," she told the man. "If they see me, they'll send me away, or worse." He nodded, as if expecting this, and handed her a slip of paper with nothing but a time and a place. That night, the town was quiet, except for the faint hum of the streetlights. Ruth followed the path up the ridge where the gates of the Grant estate rose like iron teeth against the sky. She slipped in through a side entrance the stranger had left unlocked, keeping to the shadows as she made her way to the east wing. Isabella lay pale and still, her skin damp, her breathing uneven. The air in her room was heavy with the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume, but underneath it, Ruth caught something else. Faint, but there. Illness, not the kind doctors could see. She reached into the satchel she'd carried since she was a child, the same one her grandmother had once filled with dried herbs in glass jars. Her fingers worked quickly, crushing leaves, mixing oils, whispering the words her grandmother had said were not spells, but prayers. She placed the mixture beneath Isabella's pillow and pressed a warm cloth to her chest. By morning, there was change. Color had returned to Isabella's cheeks, her breathing steadier, her pulse stronger. Servants whispered in the hall, surprised. Ruth kept hidden, slipping out before anyone could see her. But 2 nights later, the stranger came again, not with gratitude, but with worry. Isabella had worsened. Fever returned, stronger than before. Ruth was brought back under cover of darkness, and this time she searched the room. It wasn't until she checked the food tray that she saw it, fine powder dusting the edge of a half-eaten dessert. It was bitter when she touched it to her tongue, the kind of bitterness she recognized from her grandmother's warnings. Someone was slipping something into the girl's meals. Her stomach turned. This wasn't just sickness. Someone wanted Isabella gone. Now the real danger was clear. It wasn't just about saving her. It was about finding the person who was trying to end her life. What would you do in Ruth's place? Do you think she should go to the police? Or handle this herself? Ruth knew she couldn't wait for chance to reveal the truth. The next night she hid in the shadows of Isabella's room, her eyes fixed on the door. Hours passed. The house was still, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. Then, soft footsteps. The door eased open, and a woman stepped inside, holding a tray. Even in the dim light, Ruth recognized her. Evelyn Grant, Isabella's own aunt. Immaculate hair, diamond earrings catching the faint glow. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere she stepped. Ruth watched as Evelyn leaned over the food, slipping a fine stream of powder from a small silver vial into the girl's drink. It was so deliberate, so practiced, that Ruth felt her chest tighten. This wasn't the first time. The why came quickly: inheritance. With Isabella gone, Evelyn stood next in line to a fortune that could buy silence from anyone. Ruth stepped from the shadows, her voice low but steady. "I've seen enough." Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't beg or deny it. Instead, she smiled faintly. "You shouldn't be here, girl. But now that you are, perhaps you'll take the blame for me." By morning, that's exactly what happened. The story hit faster than Ruth could have imagined. The local paper screamed the headline, "Witch Girl Curses Billionaire's Daughter." Television crews camped outside the estate gates. People who once turned away from her now stared openly, some with fear, some with a twisted satisfaction. Police arrived at the diner's back alley, dragging her into the cold morning light. She barely had time to speak before the estate's lawyer released a statement. There is no record of Ruth Miller ever entering the Grant property. Just like that, her presence was erased from the official story. It looked like the town had finally destroyed her for good. But they had underestimated the one person who believed in her. The man in the black coat finally stepped into the light. His name was Mr. Hayes, once the personal driver for Richard Grant, but more importantly, a man fiercely loyal to Isabella's late mother. He had watched the family's world change after her death, watched the power shift into colder hands. When Isabella fell ill, Hayes suspected the truth long before Ruth did, but he needed someone who could see what others couldn't, someone who could act without the weight of the Grant name holding them down. That's why he'd sought Ruth out. Hayes had more than suspicion, he had proof. Hidden deep inside a worn leather briefcase was the key. Grainy but undeniable footage from a hidden camera in Isabella's room. The video showed Evelyn Grant, late at night, slipping the same silver vial into her niece's food. No excuses, no misunderstanding, just the truth, captured in cold clarity. Knowing the Grants could bury the evidence if he took it to the wrong hands, Hayes smuggled it to the one person he trusted outside the family, a local journalist named Claire Porter, who had spent years exposing corruption in the region. When the footage went public, the outrage was instant. Headlines flipped overnight. The same reporters who had painted Ruth as a danger now called her a hero. Under mounting pressure, the police released Ruth. Within days, Evelyn Grant was arrested, her diamond earrings traded for steel bracelets. And for the first time in weeks, Isabella stood in front of a crowd, still pale but smiling, testifying in Ruth's defense. "She saved my life," she told the court, "and I owe her everything." The town, so quick to condemn, now seemed desperate to claim Ruth as one of their own. Offers came in, money, shelter, even jobs, from people who hadn't spared her a glance when she was sleeping behind the diner. But Ruth didn't answer right away, because what she decided to do next shocked everyone even more. Richard Grant himself came to see her, stepping out of a black car that seemed far too polished for the cracked pavement of the town square. He thanked her for saving his daughter, his voice steady, but his eyes carrying something closer to humility than pride. Then came his offer, a full scholarship to any university she chose, a place in his own home, and the promise that no one in this town would ever harm her again. It was safety, comfort, and opportunity, all laid at her feet. Ruth listened quietly, then shook her head. "I'm grateful," she said, "but I don't want to leave. There are too many here who need help." With the small sum Isabella insisted on giving her, and with donations from those who now saw her in a different light, Ruth opened a modest clinic in an old storefront downtown. It had no polished marble, no chandeliers, just shelves of remedies, worn chairs, and the steady presence of a girl who once slept behind a diner. In time, the same people who had crossed the street to avoid her came to her door in search of healing. Farmers with frostbitten hands, children with fevers, mothers too tired to hope. And she treated them all, never turning anyone away. The girl they called a witch became the town's guardian, and the same people who once feared her now owed her their lives. What do you think? Was Ruth's gift magic, or just a heart that refused to give up? Let us know in the comments. I'm